but do not require kafara or penalty. I'm going to try to get through these in sort of quick succession. And when we conclude the session on fasting, I'll allow for some questions there. So there's actually quite a lot. It says there's 57 things that nullify the fast but do not necessitate expiation. Your fast will break. You have to do qada, but there's no kafara, there's no penalty. So if a person fasting eats raw rice, flour, wheat, or wheat grain, the person eats a mouthful of salt, eating soil that contains no medical benefit and not being in the habit of eating it, eating the stone of a fruit, cotton or paper, eating raw and uncooked quince, that's a type of sort of vegetable, eating a raw walnut, swallowing a pebble, metal or soil, and so taking an enema, pouring drops through the nostrils breaks the fast, and pouring of something down the throat, and that's the most correct position. Oil drops in the ear, dripping water into the ear, and that's also the soundest opinion. There's been some confusion in recent times about application of eye drops and ear drops, and I'll come to that at the end. So applying medicine to a wound of the stomach or head, which then penetrates a cavity reaching the inside of the stomach or brain. And if rain or snow water enters the throat and is swallowed by accident, and that's the most correct opinion. If one accidentally eats the fast water, you focus. That's why even you be careful and don't accentuate too much. If one is coerced to break his fast, even if it is through intercourse, if a female is coerced to indulge in intercourse, then the expiation is not imposed on her. If a married woman or slave breaks her fast for fear of falling ill because of the duties she performs, again, there will be qada but no kafara. If water is poured inside a person who is sleeping in any manner, eating on purpose after eating forgetfully does not impose the expiation, even if one knows the hadith concerning it, and that's the soundest opinion. So somebody's forgotten to eat. When they've remembered, they've carried on eating. Right? In that case, the fast is broken, but there's no penalty. If someone engages in intercourse, forgetting that he's fasting, and then after remembering continues, again, the same ruling as eating. If a person eats after making his intention of fasting during the day, right? So after making his intention during the day, not if it was the night before. If a person begins the day as a traveler and then intends residence and thereafter breaks his fast by eating. So he was a traveler to begin with. He had the option of not fasting. He did choose to fast, then later became resident, and he broke his fast by eating. If a person becomes a traveler after starting the day as a resident and thereafter breaks his fast by eating, again, there's no penalty. There's a qada, but no penalty. If a person, the rulings regarding someone who's traveling, when they can not fast and when they should, when they shouldn't, is all coming up. If a person abstains from eating with no intention of fasting and no intention of breaking the fast either, right? So in that case, he hasn't fasted basically, so he's liable for a qada. If one eats the pre-dawn meal or has intercourse during which he has doubt about the rising of dawn, where in reality it has already dawned. Basically, what that's saying is, if someone carries on eating, thinking that Fajr time has not started, but in reality, Fajr time has already started. So they've already ruined their fast. It's already broken, but there's no penalty, there's no kafara for this. So that's why the best thing is, obviously nowadays we have timetables, you have calendars, you know the fast is going to end at 5 minutes past 4, for example. Stop a few minutes before. Don't go up to the very last minute. The expiation is not imposed if a person breaks his fast believing that the sun had set when it had not. So the same applies for Maghrib time as well. So he opens his fast thinking it's Maghrib, actually later realizes it's just because of clouds or whatever obstruction, actually still daytime. So his fast is broken, but there's no penalty. He must do qada, no penalty. Then some rulings which are given, which are completely abhorrent acts and vile acts, but the fiqh must cater for any possibility. So basically, ejaculation with intercourse with a dead person or an animal, or self-induced, and with any other form of intimacy will result in the fast being broken, but without penalty. The penalty is if it's done in the sort of outside of Ramadan, what would be considered correct and halal manner. Right? In other manners, then the penalty is not imposed. It's a kafara. There's no expiation if a person breaks a fast other than the fast of Ramadan. So that's why I was telling you about the adab and respect of Ramadan. That this ruling of kafara only applies to fasting of Ramadan. Outside of Ramadan, any fast which is broken in any way will not incur the penalty. There will just be qada. So also establishing relations with a partner who's sleeping, entering anything into the female organ, that's the most correct opinion, and inserting a finger or any other instrument with water or oil or medication into the rear passage or female passage. This is the opted view on this matter. And same applies with a piece of cotton or anything else. Expiation is not imposed if smoke is intentionally inhaled into the throat. The fast will break. So smoking will break your fast. Right? So there won't be a penalty based on that ruling, but it will break the fast. This is something that strangely in recent times I've seen being contested as well, on the basis that it's not food or drink. It's not just food or drink that will invalidate your fast. And I might as well cover it here. Inhaler will also break your fast on the same principle. If somebody is asthmatic and is basically having an asthma attack, it is something that's quite dangerous, can be life-threatening as well. So that person can take the inhaler. They will fall into the category of somebody who's fallen extremely ill and has to break their fast. Their fast will be broken, but there will not be a penalty. They will have to do qada later. Right? So that's the ruling for inhalers as well. Likewise, if a person intentionally returns a mouthful of vomit back inside, so if the vomit was a mouthful and then it's swallowed, that will break the fast, and he knows and he remembers that he's fasting. If a person eats the food that is stuck between his teeth, the size of a chickpea or more, this will break the fast but will not impose kafara or penalty. If a person intended to form his intention of fasting in the day, but he eats forgetfully before making his intention in the day, then he's not liable for expiation, though he is liable to make up that day. Now, it's not a matter of he can still make the intention and fast. Understand the difference. If he's already fasting, if he made the intention the night before and he's fasting and he forgets and he eats, he carries on fasting. He hasn't made the intention, he was planning to do it during the day and he forgot about it and ate. Now he's got to do qaza. If one becomes unconscious, even for the entire month of Ramadan, except the actual day in which one fainted, and if it occurred at night, except the day that follows the night. So basically, what this is saying is, if somebody's unconscious, then for the entire month of Ramadan, then is given the status of that of a sleeping person and is liable for the missed days, except the actual day in which one fainted. And if it occurred at night, then one is to make up for the entire period of fainting, except the day that follows this night. So this differs to somebody who's suffering a bout of insanity. So what's it basically saying? Somebody's fainted, is unconscious, and the whole month of Ramadan is unconscious, he must make up all of those days, except for the first day where he became unconscious, because he'd made the niyyah. That's the reasoning why. On the day where he became unconscious, he'd made the niyyah. His fasting had commenced. And at Maghrib time, his fast will have finished. He's not done anything to break his fast. So that one's complete. But for the following, he's unconscious. There's no intention. Therefore, he must make up for them. That's clear? So that's the reasoning behind that. If a person suffers from insanity for part of the month, he is to make up the days, all of them. And the basis for this is that there is no hardship in making up days which are less than a month, as distinguished from the person who is insane for the entire month and is subjected to hardship through performance. So this is for part of the month. If one suffers insanity for the entire period of Ramadan, he's not liable to make up the days, even if this person is deemed legally insane, such that he only recovers at night from the insanity or during the day after the time of the intention has passed. Because you can't fast at night and neither after the niyyah time has elapsed as well. So if it's the entirety of the month, then the Sharia doesn't impose that obligation upon him, because that's considered too much of a burden for that person to carry. So there's somebody there, this in italics at the bottom. If one faints or is unconscious for part of the month of Ramadan, or even the entire period of Ramadan, he is liable to make up the days. If one is insane for part of the month, he is also liable to make up the days, though if one suffers insanity for the entire month, he is not liable to make up the days. So there's a slight difference in ruling there. When is it necessary to refrain from eating during the day in Ramadan? Obviously, for a person fasting, he's not going to eat during the day. So this specifically relates to somebody who, for whatever reason, is not fasting during the month of Ramadan. These are the rulings for when that person must still abstain from eating and drinking. If a person breaks his fast, it is necessary to abstain from eating for the remainder of the day. This, again, out of adab and respect of Ramadan. If a woman becomes pure from her menstruation or postnatal bleeding straight after the true dawn, then she must refrain from eating for the remainder of the day. And so there's an important masala here. We have some sisters online, and obviously, this may be a question, something that can come up in the household. So for everybody, it's good to know. While a woman is menstruating, it is haram for her to fast. And she should not imitate doing something which is haram for her to do. Therefore, she should not go out of her way to make it appear as if she's fasting. So this is a masala that should be understood. Yes, obviously for other reasons, for avoiding, just out of a possibility of a concept of haya, and also just avoiding deliberately eating and drinking in front of other people who are fasting just to cause distress, that may cause distress to them or whatever. If she chooses to sort of isolate herself and eat and drink in isolation, that's different. But actually making herself to appear like she's fasting, that is imitating something which is haram for her at that time and is not recommended or not permitted. And number 3 and 4 is if a boy matures after true dawn, or if a non-believer accepts Islam after true dawn, they must abstain from eating for the remainder of that day, and they are not required to make up the day. Whilst the person in point 1 and point 2 are liable for that day, they won't be liable for the day because fasting was not fard upon them at the start of the day. So, for example, non-Muslim accepts Islam at Zohar time in Ramadan. He won't be required to do qada of that particular day because at the start of that day, it wasn't obligatory upon him. And so his obligation will commence from the next day. Same with a child that becomes baligh at that particular time. What is disliked when fasting and what is recommended? So disliked makruh things that you shouldn't do that are disliked. Number 1, to taste something with no reason is disliked. Simply just literally, tasting something on the tip of the tongue, for example, for a woman who fears any kind of reproach in terms of her cooking or whatever, that would be permitted, but without reason is disliked. Chewing something without a reason is disliked, and that means something that does not have any so, for example, it gives me an example, such as a woman in the presence of another person who can chew the food for her child. She doesn't need to do that herself, and she shouldn't. Equally, chewing on gum, and it doesn't mean chewing gum or flavored chewing gum that is common here. This is a natural sort of gum or sap from trees or whatever, which doesn't have a flavor, is disliked unless there is a reason. And any form of physical intimacy is prohibited for somebody in particular. This ruling is for somebody who then is likely to go on and advance and break their fast. Right? So is not in that state of self-assurance. And gathering saliva in the mouth and then swallowing it is disliked. To perform any act which is believed to weaken one from fasting, such as cupping, acupuncture, and bloodletting, and here giving blood tests, etc., or just generally giving blood. If giving blood is not going to break your fast, as I said to you, general principle is something leaving the body is not going to break the fast, it's going in that matters. However, if you're gonna give blood and it's so much that it's gonna lead to weakness where you're gonna end up having to break your fast, then no, right? Then it should be avoided. What is not disliked when fasting? So things, again, this is misconceptions. People might have misconceptions about this, so they clarify that these things are not makruh. They are not disliked. You can do them and there's nothing wrong with it. Okay, so first of all, sort of physical intimacy that's not going to lead to somebody breaking their fast, right? So somebody who's sort of assured of themselves and is not going to get to that point where their fast is going to end up broken. That's permitted. And there's no karaha, there's no dislike as well. Oiling the mustache, surma, applying surma in the eyes, cupping, if it's not going to lead to weakness and is not going to, take that person close to breaking their fast or make their fast difficult for them. Bloodletting, again, on the same principle, that if it's not going to lead to weakness and not going to cause difficulty in them completing their fast. There's no dislike in using miswak. It's actually sunnah. The Prophet ﷺ very frequently while fasting would use miswak. So not only is it not disliked, it's actually a well-established sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ. So even if the miswak is moist or wet with water, however, this ruling doesn't apply to toothpaste. The sunnah act is the miswak. So although with the brushing your teeth, if it's not swallowed, then it's not going to break your fast. But in terms of if you want to keep to the sunnah, then you should use a miswak, in particular during Ramadan while fasting. That's specifically what I'm talking about. Rinsing the mouth or nostrils or other than wudu. So obviously in wudu you can do, but even outside of wudu, rinsing your mouth and nostrils is not disliked, and neither is taking a bath or dressing in wet clothes to cool down, and the fatwa is issued in accordance with this view. So in hot climates where it gets extremely hot, obviously fasting becomes even more difficult. So any of these measures to try and cool down the body is perfectly permitted. There's no karaha or dislike while fasting. Because it's come up a couple of times, the surma and the eyes, so I'll just discuss with you the matter of the eye drops and the ear drops. Recently, there's been some discussions around the fact that obviously, as you will, I'm pretty sure you will know, there is an opening inside your eyelids here. And actually water or any liquid that's consumed in the mouth, some people I don't know how they do it, but I've actually seen it. I've seen videos of people like squirting liquid out of their of this opening in the eye. So there's obviously a route from here. Even more so when applying surma, right? Sometimes you can see the color on the tongue. Whereas with the ears, does it actually go into the brain or actually into the throat? And based on that, there's been a lot of discussion. However, personally, I prefer to stick to the traditional opinion. There's not just traditional. The Majlis of Al Jamiatul Ashrafiyya, Mubarakpur in India, have issued a sort of research on this matter a few years ago. Right? This is a panel of scholars that gathers every year annually. They have a seminar of fiqh where they discuss issues that have arisen in modern times, and they've done some quite extensive research on this, and their research is based on the fact that there are different openings in the body. You have pores and very tiny openings in the body, all over the body. They are not subject to the conditions of fasting. It is the main sort of openings, the ears, the nostrils, the mouth, etc., which basically are subject to the rulings of fasting. And on that basis, they have established that, therefore, the traditional ruling will still be upheld, that actually anything going in the eyes is not going to invalidate the fast, and the ears is going to invalidate the fast. So that's their sort of research, and they've authenticated and substantiated the traditional opinion that that's the fatwa. So, although there is some disagreement, right? I'll put that in front of you as well. That which is recommended while fasting, there are things that are recommended for the one observing the fast. So number one, suhoor. Having suhoor is very blessed. The Prophet said it's a blessed meal. There is barakah in suhoor, so you should have suhoor. And to delay the pre-dawn meal, basically have it closer to the time of suhoor, and to haste in breaking the fast on a day where there's no obstruction or clouds in the sky. So basically where there's no possibility of becoming confused and breaking your fast early. That applies now as well because of the time and being calculated and calendars and so on. There are narrations which mention the Prophet ﷺ just coming up to Maghrib time would sit there with a date in his hand. And as soon as he felt that Maghrib had entered, he would break his fast straight away. Being hasty to that extent. That's why it mentions in the notes that this is in accordance with the hadith. So some other circumstances, awarid, fortuitous circumstances, people who are ill, who are pregnant and breastfeeding, it mentions that it is permissible to break one's fast for one who is ill and fears aggravation of his illness or a delay in recovery. Now, this must be established either through trial and error, meaning start the fast and then he's become too ill and too weak to continue, and so now he knows personally that he can't fast, or by a well-established, qualified medical sort of doctor or expert, right? Just not based on intuition. That won't suffice. And a pregnant or nursing woman is permitted to leave the fast if she fears a loss of mind, death, or illness upon herself or the child, regardless if the child is her own or she's nursing somebody else's child. For example, she's a wet nurse. So this goes on to, we're coming up to, we're going to discuss not the penalty, but rather the exemption that is paid, right? Fidya. So a woman who's pregnant or breastfeeding is not, she cannot pay fidya. It's not a terminal illness. Fidya is for people who are terminal, either due to old age or due to nature of the illness, right? It's terminal conditions. So therefore, if she is going to miss the fasting for that reason, it is a valid reason to miss the fast, but no fidya. She must do qada, because it's not a permanent condition. At some point, she's not going to be nursing, or she's going to give birth to the child, and she's going to be able to fast then. So the fear which is considered is that which is based upon one's predominant belief through past experience, or the information from an Islamic physician who is skillful and upright. And I guess in modern times you can include in that, you can remove that restriction of Islamic as in based on actual medical advice. It's permitted to break the fast if one suffers unbearable thirst or hunger in which he fears his demise. So basically, for whatever reason, the person ends up in a condition where he thinks if he doesn't eat or drink, he's going to die, then he should break his fast. It's permissible. The traveler is legally permitted to break his fast. However, to fast is better provided it will not harm him, and provided that most of his companions accompanying are also fasting, and that each person is funding his own expenses separately. Though if they are sharing expenses of the travel or are not fasting, then it's better to break the fast and to be in accordance with the group. So dependent, and if you're alone, then obviously it's up to the person. If he's able to, if he's well enough, if that traveling is not going to actually be too burdensome upon him, then he should fast. That's the recommendation. And also, his traveling must begin before suhoor on that day, before Fajr on that day. If he's going to travel, if he's going to leave at Zohar time, for example, then that first day he must fast. Any other days that he's traveling, then that dispensation kicks in after that. If a person dies before his excuse ends, such as illness and travel, he is not required to make a will to redeem the days he has lost. And if one finds other days in which he can make up the missed days, then he must do so. Right? So if he's still alive and he has days to make up, then he must make them up. And if not, then he's required to leave a will instructing his heirs to redeem the days he was healthy for, or the days he was resident for. It is not a stipulation to make up the fasts of Ramadan successively. So let's say, for argument's sake, somebody's missed 10 fasts last year Ramadan. They don't have to be made up 10 consecutive days. Any 10 days throughout the year, he can make them up. However, it should be done as soon as possible, because if his once 10 days where he could have fasted have elapsed, then basically he's going to be questionable for them. And so therefore should be done as a matter of priority, so that he can get them done with certainty before he dies. If another Ramadan comes along, yet one has not fasted the previous Ramadan, then one is to perform the current one and thereafter make up the unperformed Ramadan. And there is no fidya for delaying these missed fasts up to the current Ramadan. The principle is, must be done before he dies. Right? And because you don't know when you're going to die, therefore should be done as soon as possible. It is permitted for a frail old person, male or female, to break their fast. They must, however, pay the fidya for every day missed. The fidya is half a sa of wheat, that's 1.6 kilograms, or the equivalent in currency. Note that the frail old person is called Sheikh Fani in Arabic for the reason that he is close to death, and Ajuz Faniya for an elderly woman. What's that saying? Basically, is telling you this ruling is given for a person who we refer to as a Sheikhul Fani. Sheikh means elderly, Fani means perishing. Basically, somebody is about to die. They're so old that they can't fast. They're too weak due to old age. Now, what's the general philosophy here, or principle, that next year he's going to be even older and weaker if he's still alive, or she. So there's no hope of them recovering, because you can't recover from old age. This will be extrapolated to other illnesses. So only a person who is considered terminally ill to such an extent that they're never going to recover, or there's no hope of their recovery, because Allah can give recovery however he wishes, but there's no, looking at physical means, there's no hope of that recovery, that can be extrapolated here. So pregnancy doesn't come into this. I get asked this quite frequently. I've been asked the question, my wife is pregnant, can I give fidya? No, you can't. For any other illnesses, what's the ruling? You do qada. Qada is number one. Even if you give your fidya and you've had time to do qada and you don't, you will be liable for that and you'll be sinful. your fidya will go to waste. If, on the other hand, you give fidya and you do qada as well, you give fidya as a precaution and you do qada, that fidya will be considered as sadaqah. And the actual asal, the origin is qada. So this goes for diabetics, for people with heart patients, asthmatics, any other sort of chronic illnesses. In this country, the mas'ala is a bit different. Right? Because the length of fasting changes throughout the year so much. Look at the Fajr and Maghrib times in midwinter, for example. Right? So the fast in midwinter is basically, skipping your breakfast and having like a late lunch. It's a matter of 8-10 hours. And this is manageable even for people with quite severe chronic illnesses. Therefore, those people cannot give fidya. They must do qada in the winter months. Only those people in the UK, due to illness, will be permitted to give fidya are those people who are so ill that even in the middle of winter, they can't manage to keep a fast. That's what you've got to keep in mind. If a person vowed to fast his entire life and as a result becomes weak and feeble because of his working efforts to provide for himself and his family, then he's to break his fast and pay the fidya. If, however, he's unable to pay the fidya due to financial difficulty, then he is to seek forgiveness from Allah and rescind his vows. So when is the payment of fidya not valid? If the expiation of a broken oath or murder is required of a person and he does not have the financial means to carry out the expiation of feeding a slave or to feed or clothe unfortunate persons, then he is required to fast. Though if this person is old and feeble and therefore unable to fast, or he does not fast when he has the ability to do so until he becomes old and enfeebled, then in both cases it is not permissible to pay the fidya. In that case, he'll just have to do tawbah and repent to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and hope that he accepts his tawbah. And the permissibility of breaking a voluntary fast with or without reason, this is an interesting one. It is permitted for a person who is fasting, who is performing a voluntary fast, to break it with no reason at all. So if it's a nafal fast, you are permitted to break that fast even if you don't have a valid reason. But you must make it up. It's necessary to make it up on another day. Entertaining, having guests, entertaining and eating with them is considered a valid reason according to the most evident view for a nafal fast. For both the guest and the host, and for them is the glad tidings of great benefit. Look at this hadith of the Prophet ﷺ. Whoever breaks his fast for the right of his brother, the rewards of fasting 1,000 days are written for him, and upon making up the day, the rewards of another 1,000 days of fasting is added to his account. So 2,000 days. 1,000 for taking consideration of his guest, his brother, and dining with him. And secondly, and this could be for the guest as well, like he's gone to somebody's house, he's got enough of fast, they are insisting that he eats, right? This applies both ways. So 1,000 when breaking the fast and another 1,000 when he makes it up, because he must make it up. Right? But it's permissible to break and there's no sin. If a person breaks a voluntary fast in any situation, he's required to make up the day, except if he begins the fast during one of the 5 following days, they being the 2 days of Eid and the days of Tashriq. For verily, there's no requirement to make up the days if one breaks his fast during these days, because he shouldn't have been fasting in the first place. And this is the most evident view on the matter. If a person vows to perform good deeds, then he must fulfill what he has promised, provided 3 conditions are met. Number 1, the act that he promises or vows to do is from the category which is wajib at any time. So for example, fasting in Ramadan is fard, praying 5 times a day is fard, doing Hajj once in your lifetime is fard. These are the kind of actions that you can pledge for the sake of Allah. So I pledge to pray 10 nafil, or I pledge to fast 10 days or whatever. You can't do this with an activity that's never compulsory. So a valid pledge is only for those activities, those ibadat, I should say, those worships that are at some point obligatory. Number two, second condition, the primary actual act itself must be specifically intended by the person, not something prerequisite to it. So, for example, you can't make a pledge to do wudu. Wudu is a prerequisite for salah. It's not a standalone act of ibadah in itself. And thirdly, the act that one promises must not already be required of a person. You can't make a pledge, I vow that I'm going to fast. If I get well, I'm going to fast for the month of Ramadan. You're obligated to do that anyway, right? So it's not valid if it's something that's already obligatory upon him. One is therefore not required to perform wudu if he promises to do so. Likewise, a person is not required to perform the recital of prostration, sajda, tilawat, if he vows to do that, because he has to recite a verse of tilawat, of sajda to do that. And when he does that, it automatically becomes wajib upon him. One is required to visit the ill if he promises, is not required to visit the ill if he promises to do so. That is an example of an act which is never fard. It's a good deed to go and visit the ill, but is it ever fard, like salah, like fasting, like hajj, like zakat? No. So you can't vow, say, if I get well, I'm going to go and visit 10 people, 10 ill people. That wouldn't be valid. Promising to do acts of worship which are already required is not valid. One's vow is valid if he promises to free a slave. If a person vows to perform religious retreat, i'tikaf, then the vow is valid. Vowing to perform an optional prayer or fast is valid. If a person vows a general unspecified promise, such as saying, I swear by Allah that upon me is 2 rakahs of prayer, then he's required to fulfill this vow. If, on the other hand, one attaches a condition to a promise, so for example, if Allah grants me a child, I shall feed 10 people, then he's also required to fulfill the vow if the condition is, it materializes. If it doesn't, then he's not obligated to. Then you've got a condition for somebody who vows to fasting on the Eid, and you've got a little bit more information about the vows. I'm going to move on to the next topic, which is i'tikaf. So its definition is to remain within intention of seclusion in a masjid where the 5 daily prayers are performed in congregation. It's not valid in a masjid where the 5 daily prayers are not performed in congregation, and this is the opted opinion on the matter. I'tikaf for a female is in the masjid of her home. So any place, any room in the home can be designated as musalla, and she can do i'tikaf in there, not in actual masjid. So there's different types of i'tikaf. Wajib, which is basically one that somebody vows to do. Got sunnah i'tikaf, sunnah muakkada, which is the last 10 days of Ramadan, where one person in the community, if he does this, the sunnah is fulfilled from everybody, sunnah kifaya. And the third type is recommended, which is at any time of the year, which is recommended basically any time you walk into a masjid. Anytime you walk into the masjid, make niyyah of i'tikaf. Learn the Arabic words, nawaitu sunnat al-i'tikaf. Or as soon as you walk in, just in your own head, just say in your own language, right? I'm making the intention of i'tikaf. And any time that you spend in the masjid, you will also be rewarded for i'tikaf along with any other ibadah that you conduct. Fasting is only conditional for the i'tikaf that has been vowed. The shortest period for the recommended i'tikaf is just even 1 moment. So for example, you walk in from one door of the masjid, you do niyat of i'tikaf, walk out of the other door, all that duration, the few moments that you are in the mosque, you've got the reward of i'tikaf. And so even if one does this while walking through the masjid, and fatwa is given in accordance with this view. Now, I'm just going to go through in summary of, very quickly, let's just go through these rulings. The person in i'tikaf is not allowed to leave the masjid except for a legal need, such as the Friday prayer. So he's doing i'tikaf in such a masjid where they have daily prayers, but there's no Jummah. It's not a Jami' masjid. In that case, every Friday he'll have to go out to pray Jummah, so he's allowed to leave the masjid. And or call of nature, such as, obviously going to the toilet, or if there's no facilities in the masjid, or because of necessity, such as the masjid collapses, then he has to leave. In addition, one may leave if he's coerced by an oppressor or because his family members have been separated and he's required to attend to them. If one fears for himself or his goods from a rebel, then he is permitted to leave and enter another masjid immediately after leaving the first one. If one exits the masjid for any duration of time without a valid reason, the wajib form of i'tikaf becomes invalid. Likewise, other types of i'tikaf, such as the voluntary i'tikaf, is deemed as over. So if somebody was doing the last 10 days i'tikaf, their i'tikaf is broken. They will be liable to complete the rest of that subsequently as well. The person performing i'tikaf is permitted to eat and drink and sleep and to form a contract for the purpose of trade for himself or his family in the masjid, a contract which he or his family are in need of, and this is to be performed only within the masjid and preferably without any physical goods being in the presence. It's disliked to bring items of trade to the masjid. It's disliked to form a contract for the purpose of trade, even though it is permitted, and it is disliked to maintain complete silence. This is something that sometimes people often do, they cover their faces and basically complete silence for 10 days. This is disliked if one believes it is an act that will bring him closer to Allah and be rewarding. Right? There's no reward associated with it. And in fact, if there is one is to engage in beneficial discussion and learning, this is one quite often that I've had to prompt people who are in i'tikaf for. It's better for them to come and join a gathering, a halaqah of learning, than sit in their cubicles. Right? That's recommended. It's forbidden to indulge in any physical intimacy. I'tikaf is nullified if one indulges in any intimacy. And if a person vows to observe i'tikaf for a certain number of days, then he must observe i'tikaf during the nights of those days as well. Can't just do daytime shift only. Days means days and nights. Person who vows i'tikaf for a certain number of nights must also observe the days consecutively, even if it's a consecutive order is not stipulated. And this is the most evident view on the matter. A person who vows 2 days in retreat must also remain for 2 nights. If a person forms an intention specifically for the days without the nights, that will be valid. If one vows i'tikaf for a month, and he intends the days only or intends the nights only, then this intention cannot come into effect unless he expresses what he wishes to rule out and exclude in his actual intention. The religious retreat or i'tikaf is legal and permissible through Quranic text and from the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ. Religious retreat is from the most honorable of actions, provided it is performed with sincerity. From the benefits and merits of i'tikaf is the heart being separated from the matters of the world while submitting to the master and owner of all that exists. Another merit is a person remaining in actions of worship in the house of Allah. In addition to this benefit, if one is fortified, safeguarded with his stronghold, right? Basically, he's away from sins. And Imam Ata ibn Abi Rabah states the following: the example of a person in i'tikaf is like the person who stands and waits on a great door, like at the door of a king, because of a need that he has. Equally, the person in i'tikaf utters, I will not leave and depart from the door of my maker until he has forgiven me. Right? That should be the intention with i'tikaf, that, oh Allah, I'm here in your house at your door and I'm not going to leave from here until you forgive me. Extremely blessed. That concludes our discussion on the chapters on fasting. And it is now 1:50. We had scheduled Zohar Salah for 2 o'clock. The section on zakat is not that long, zakat and sadqatul fitr. So I'm going to give you an opportunity to ask any questions in relation to fasting and Ramadan that we've covered so far. And what I will request is about another half an hour or so of your time, once we've prayed Zohar Salah, to finish off the section on Zakat as well. And that way we can conclude our seminar with everything that we intended to cover from the beginning. Is that okay? Yeah. So any questions in relation to fasting? Feel free to jump in anytime. Yes, what is it?
Regarding contact lenses.
It wouldn't invalidate the fast based on the fact that eye drops, if that's the ruling that is upheld, then even the solution that will be attached to the lenses, it won't invalidate the fast in that way. There's also a question regarding istinja as well. Yes, we've already covered, obviously, that anything entering the rear passage in any liquid form, medication, water, etc. Therefore, the ruling or advice rather is that don't accentuate, whether it's gargling, whether it's water in the nose, whether even in istinja, don't accentuate. And also, before you get up, right, dry yourself so that you are limiting the possibility of water entering the body. That's the advice. Any other questions? Yeah.
Then made expiation. The expiation of 60 days would cover all the Ramadan of the previous year, or just one.
No, if the violations are in previous years and they have not been expiated, one expiation will cover those violations up until that point. So we've already covered this. Unless it's in between, unless the kafara occurs between two violations, then there'll be two kafaras. Otherwise, it will suffice for both, and that can be extrapolated further.
So in that case, would there be qada for the
Yes, there will be qada. Qada, obviously, in any case, whether there is kafara, there isn't kafara, any missed fast for any reason, qada is there for definite. But kafara is separate ruling.
Does that qada also apply for somebody who's been in a coma for several years?
Well, we've already that will come under the ruling of the section insanity and what was it, unconsciousness. So a coma is a form of unconsciousness, so that will come under that ruling. Anything else?
Do you sort of combine niyats as well? So suppose you're doing kafara or qada, could you say fast on a Monday and say sunnah as well, or could you just, or is it just one niyat per fast?
Not really, no. Because the niyyah of qada has to be specific. We already discussed that. It has to be done the night before, and it has to be specific, and it has to be for that purpose. So ideally, make up your qada first, and then obviously go on towards nafal and so on.
You talk about obviously the dislike of the use of toothpaste.
Yeah.
What about just the brush?
Yeah, that would be fine, and that dislike again is on the basis of possibility of like swallowing. If there isn't, then that doesn't exist. But my main sort of point was it's an opportunity to earn great reward by following a sunnah that is extremely well established. When I say extremely well, there's lots and lots of narrations regarding the Prophet ﷺ physically doing miswak while fasting, and to the point where it was something that was very beloved to the Prophet ﷺ. So why not take benefit of that in the month of Ramadan? Yeah. So you just spit out.
Spit it out.
Yeah. So we've got some. What's the ruling for a traveler during Ramadan who stayed half of the month in another country and returns home in the last half of Ramadan? Does he complete his fast according to the country where he started his fasting? Or no, wherever you are. So basically, if you come back to the UK, then you go back to the calendar. If that means you're, fasting one extra, then that will be one extra. So contact lenses, someone's asked, please repeat. Based on, we've said that eye drops, according to the traditional opinion, wouldn't invalidate the fast. And so therefore, I think the main contention there would be the solution that they placed in, and that wouldn't invalidate the fast. Swimming, not really, should be avoided because there's quite a substantial possibility of swallowing. Remember, it's even one drop of water, even like a drop of rainwater. We've covered that. So I wouldn't put myself in that position where so close to possibly jeopardizing your ibadah. However, technically, if there isn't any consumption, then it won't invalidate the fast. So that's what the ruling. Okay, so I think there's nothing else here. I've got through whatever there is online as well. And if there is any, I'll give you an opportunity to come back to it once we've completed the section on zakat and sadaqatul fitr as well. We've got a few minutes for azan and sunnats so that we can have our jamaat at the announced time of 2 o'clock, inshallah. So